Right. University education, that is higher learning, of course, in college and universities, and its future, especially with regards to student accommodation. That's what you're talking about this morning, especially 1 year after the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted nearly every aspect of our lives, including higher learning. And my guest this morning, joining me in studio, Raghav Gandhi is the Chief Investment Officer at Econ Holdings Limited. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
All right, and joining us virtually this morning is Professor Robert Gateru, is the Vice Chancellor at Riara University. Prof, good morning and welcome to the show.
Good morning, thank you for having me.
Great, and also joining us this morning is Brian Kasiu, is a student at Strathmore University and also a resident at Kwetu Hostels. Brian, good morning and welcome to the show. Right, I think, of course, Brian will be joining us in a bit, but that's what we're talking about this morning, and we want you to be part of it. That's why we asked you earlier on our question of the day. Are you a college student? Are you a college or university student? What's your worst experience with off-campus accommodation? Remember, you can tweet us at NTV Kenya, at @VictorKiprop_. Make sure you use the hashtag #NewNormal. And of course, you could also join the conversation on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, where we are live streaming this morning's conversation. And just to start us off, let me start with Prof. Prof, good morning. The last 1 year has definitely been outstanding or phenomenal in every way. Nearly every aspect of our lives has been disrupted by COVID-19. And like other, of course, levels of learning, higher learning was also very much disrupted. Talk to us about that disruption and how higher learning institutions in Kenya were able to adapt and try to keep things moving.
Well, thank you very much for having me once again. Indeed, the last 12 months or so have been really, really tough for institutions, mainly because we were shut down, as you have said. And for most of us as public and private institutions, this caught us off guard, so to say. Mm-hmm. And so it was a quick adjustment, trying to see what do we do after this. Some institutions had been offering some form of blended learning or online learning for quite some time. Others were in the process of getting ready, while others were caught completely unaware of anything that was happening. Okay. For us, for example, at Riara University, we had already installed an online learning management system. So when Corona happened, we were able to quickly adjust to the online platform, and students were able to continue all through. And we were able to finish that semester and the 2 semesters that followed. So more or less, our students are where they would have been if COVID did not happen. But that did not come without challenges. And the challenges abound, and I'm sure we'll be tackling a number of those today. Yeah. But also there are institutions where, learning had to stop completely. And be adjust afresh to try and, have some form of online learning going on for students. Okay. So it's been a quick adjustment, but I say now we have normalized across the sector, and I think the situation is good, and we hope that we will not go back to where we were before.
Okay. And of course, the very people at the center of this were the students, and that's why we have Brian this morning. Brian, if you can hear me, you were at the center of this transition that Prof mentioned, of course, caught so many people unawares. One moment, learning means being in classrooms and interacting with your university dons, follow-up questions and interacting with your fellow students. And the next minute, you're told to sit in front of your smartphone, and that is now learning of the day. Just talk to us about your experience.
Yeah, I think I'll agree with Professor that learning has been a really big emotional roller coaster for most students out there. Initially, actually, the main challenge was especially for students living in student-based accommodation, is that most hostels had to shut down, either because they could not meet the simple COVID-19 protocols, or just because they could not sustain having such a large number of students, especially during a COVID pandemic. Mm-hmm. So quite a number of us had to go home, and it was a bit abrupt because learning had to stop immediately so that people can start thinking of a way forward. And I think even for me at that time, examinations had to be stopped because I was sitting for my last papers.
Yeah.
And, we had to stop for a period of like 3 months, and no communication. You're just there in a limbo, not knowing what to do. And it was a bit hectic because now you're there as a student. This learning education system was not even prepared for home-based learning. It was just physical learning. So it was a bit helter-skelter trying to make things work.
Yeah.
And but I think over the year, I think we've been able to adjust really, really well. And at least universities are starting to tailor, e-learning facilities, offering e-resources for students to accommodate, to access from anywhere in the country.
Yeah.
But now, as I think a major challenge continues to be for many students at home, how easily accessible it is to this learning resource. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Either because they don't have internet connectivity, or it's expensive to access internet, or maybe the learning environment cannot simply accommodate for them to learn. Like just we have seen in Bungoma, like what's happening right now. I think it's going to be a bit hard for those students to, learn remotely.
Okay. Makes so much sense because education is normally some sort of an equalizer. When we are in school, we are all sort of equal. But when we are forced to go home, some of us have to go to Mandera, Baringo, places where there may not be network. And when we say we go to virtual learning, there are those who will be left out, as Brian says. But clearly, as everyone has mentioned, this thing has affected nearly every sector of our economy. And from what Brian says, some university hostels, of course, had to close because they could not sustain the number of institutions. As someone who provides accommodation for the students, just talk to us about your perspective of how, of course, COVID-19 affected it, bearing in mind that learning, of course, and accommodation go hand in hand.
Yeah. For us, of course, it was a bit of a challenging year as well. We had to shut down our properties for 3 months. That was immediately after lockdown.
Yeah.
That was very much because we also wanted to implement processes, protocols in our facilities that were, let's say, fit for the, what we're referring to as the new normal, right? Making sure that we were providing a safe, healthy environment for students when they returned. So it was very much a conscious decision. But I think what we found after our properties reopened, after that 3-month break, so they opened in the start of July 2020, mm-hmm. we actually were, in a way, although COVID was very challenging and a very tough year or environment for everyone, it almost substantiated our business model, mm-hmm. the resiliency of our business model. Because ultimately, and this is kind of being borne out by what both Professor and Brian are saying, people need housing. Mm-hmm. So regardless of whether there's a pandemic or not, you mm-hmm. need somewhere to live. Mm-hmm. And you need education. Okay. Right? So what if our business model, which is centered around essentially both those sectors, what we were able to see is that there was a gradual return of occupancy into our properties over the course of the year, almost to the extent that we were returning to pre-pandemic levels. Okay, and this might explain the resilience that we've seen in some other markets, especially, I don't know the statistics for Kenya, but I've seen in other markets where developers have continued to increase bed capacity for accommodation, of course, contrary to perhaps the expectations that the sector would take a hit. Yeah, no, and you're 100% right. When I speak to a lot of global developers or operators within student accommodation, they actually talk about not having had any dip in occupancy. So even though their online learning has been much more prevalent than here in Kenya, where, as Professor mentioned, there's a blended model that's being followed, despite that in other markets, it was primarily online learning, occupancy didn't dip. Okay. And I think that just shows the inherent resiliency, as you mentioned, in this asset class. Okay, and Prof, definitely, I'm sure you've seen the numbers of students now who have started going back to school, and this has nothing to do perhaps with maybe the effectiveness of online learning, because for the institutions who have the capacities, they may have tried to deliver it effectively, but for the majority, the vast majority, especially public institutions, we can see a large portion of the students now going back to school and resuming physical learning. Maybe from a perspective of the future, does this speak to the issue of sustainability of online learning, and that is the shift totally to online learning?
Well, I think what I can say is that COVID-19 has taught us invaluable lessons on how to make our education system more resilient. I think we were all in a comfort zone, assuming that students will come to campus, they will learn, they will do exams, and they'll go away. But COVID has taught us otherwise. And I think the key thing for us is to pick the lessons learned from COVID, because today could be COVID. We don't know what will happen tomorrow. Yes, for those institutions that were ready, they were able to proceed quickly.
Yeah.
But we also have a lot of students who've been left behind, even in institutions that have those online learning facilities. Because one, you could have students who don't have devices. You have students who don't have electricity where they come from, so they cannot be able to log in. Internet bundles is a problem. And even the psychological preparedness of students, because when you're used to coming to class, and then now you have to take the class from home, you know, the mental anguish that students had to go through is real, and we cannot ignore that adjustment. But gradually, we have seen students appreciating that online learning can be as effective as physical learning. And thanks to facilities like Kwetu Hostels, who we partner with at Riara University, and our students are able to be accommodated there. Students have access to internet and other facilities, discussion rooms at the hostels, so they're able to even have discussions in a controlled environment, and also in a manner that they're observing COVID protocols. But moving forward, I think online learning is here to stay. But I say that with a disclaimer, that we should not let online learning come in the way of physical learning per se. Okay. A quick survey we did with our students early last year indicated the majority were preferring a hybrid or blended mode of learning, while another large group preferred face-to-face. But the numbers are shifting, and we're even seeing students who are saying, no, I don't want to come back to campus after all. Let me just study at home as I hustle out there, as I do other things. And so we need to think about the learning spaces for students. And the learning spaces are not just the physical spaces on campus. Even home is a learning space. Hostels is a learning space, and all these other places where students learn.
Okay, and
so,
I totally like your point about hostels being a learning space as well as, of course, as an addition to the classroom. And that brings me to my next point, because now that the students, a majority of them, are coming back to school, we are going back to the situation that we normally have, which is the issue of shortage of accommodation facilities, where, you know, universities cannot provide accommodation for all their students, and the rest are actually left to live, you know, in places where, of course, even the amenities expected by the students are way below the expected quality, and this, of course, reflects in their learning.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you see, even in a normal situation, hostels are part of the learning spaces of a student. But they have always been seen as a place for students to sleep, which is not the case. And so when the universities are not able to provide accommodation sufficient for students, then you find all manner of unscrupulous, to use that word, real estate developers who want to take advantage of that shortage, but they want to just provide you know, a place for students to sleep.
Okay.
But it doesn't facilitate the continued learning process of the student. And that's why we really need to think seriously about what sort of accommodation meets the standard for a student in the university to live in and to study from.
Okay.
So those are some of the questions we must ask, because students are coming back. Online learning is going on in some form.
Yeah.
But are the hostels ready? And I can say majority are not.
Okay.
But a few are ready.
And let me actually challenge a developer who deals with the hostels with me in studio, because and I think that what the point he makes is, it's not just about the building, right? It's not just the building and rental flats and then telling students, okay, you can live here.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with what the professor just mentioned. You know, for us, the student accommodation properties that we develop are not just about, designing and constructing a building and then that's it. It's about creating an environment that's fit for student living, fit for their education, fit for, the spirit, the ambience that is conducive to, young adulthood, right? We very much focus a lot on developing communities. It's about kind of engendering that spirit, because what we appreciate is that these are young adults who are on the brink of independence, right? A lot of them have just been with their parents for the majority of their lives, and this is the first time that they're kind of out there living by themselves. So it's about providing them a safe, secure environment, which is first and foremost, but it's also about letting them live a little bit of that independent life, which prepares them for the next stage, which is when they're going to be, getting their first jobs and so forth. So it's, we focus a lot more on kind of not just like I said, the construction element. Okay. That's key for our business model, but it's also the day-to-day operations. Okay.
And if you look at the figures, clearly Kenyan universities and colleges can provide accommodation for their students up to 40%. The rest have to be outside. But given then this gap, why are we not seeing, especially investors, not taking advantage of this demand?
Well, I mean, the first point that I want to address is that, to me, it's not, I don't actually think that it's the university's role to provide accommodation. Oh. That's my opinion. Okay. Right? Because university's core business model is what? It's about providing excellent education. When they start focusing on, providing accommodation, it takes resources, time, effort away from what is their core, business model focus. So really, I think it is very much up to kind of the private sector to try and fulfill that gap in demand that you've rightly identified. Why don't we see more developers, investors? I mean, maybe that's a question for others, but I mean, I think there's an element that real estate development typically has been associated with, constructing a building with apartments, let's say, or constructing a group of houses and then looking to sell them on, right? As I mentioned, our focus is so much on the day-to-day operations. You can't really do that if you've gone ahead and sold off the different apartments, right? Okay. So our focus is very much to construct, hold the properties, we own them, and then, we provide rental housing to students. And I think that's where we differentiate ourselves, because for that, you need to have kind of a long-term view, a long-term perspective, a patient capital in order to be able to hold on to assets for that long and ensure that they are maintained up to a certain standard. Like I said, that you provide those, customer experience that that is essential for people living there. Okay,
and you raised a very valid point about the difference between just building a house where students can stay and providing what we would call now a purpose-built student accommodation, which is a relatively new concept in Kenya. And I think you guys started this maybe some few years back. Talk to us about your portfolio in Kenya right now.
Yeah, so our portfolio right now is comprised of about 3,000 beds. That's across 5 properties. And, we're very much continuing to develop. We see a huge market opportunity for us based on market research that we've done. Currently, we feel that the addressable market is about 110,000 beds, across the different product segments that we have. Okay. So really, if you think about it, 3,000 beds out of 110 is not even a dip in the ocean. Okay. So we feel that there's a much larger scope, as long as I think Kenya, fulfills its objectives of being this kind of regional hub for education. It focuses on providing excellent education, which it has been within the continent. I think that growth will only continue.
Okay, and Prof, I mean, Raghav raises a very valid point about the financial constraint that comes with leaving universities to provide for student accommodation. Just talk to us about your view on that, and of course, what this means then towards the future, because when the universities cannot provide and there are no investors like Ragav who can provide quality accommodation, what the students are left with is, you know, living in dilapidated structures and situations where they're not even good for learning.
Absolutely. I fully agree with what Ragav has said, because really the core business of universities is teaching, learning, research, innovation, and empowering students to be productive citizens of the world. When you ask universities now to be real estate managers and developers, you're really taking universities out of their comfort zone. And that is why you find that because resources are constrained in the institutions, often the little resources that are there are taken towards the core business. That's paying of lecturers, buying books, you know, equipping laboratories here and there, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you find hostels are forgotten completely. The institution I went to for my undergraduate is a public one. I'll not mention, but I can tell you the hostels are still the same as when I was in campus. But in many cases, they are worse because the institutions don't have the capacity and the resources to keep, maintaining them and even adding new hostels.
Okay.
So we need a lot of partnerships with the private sector. And we are seeing quite a lot of that happening. For us at Riara, for example, when Kwetu came, we were really, really delighted because it solved quite a huge challenge we were facing. We are located on Bagadiwe. We don't have that much land to be able to put up all manner of hostels.
Yeah.
And Kwetu has been able to provide that together with other few hostel providers that we have.
Okay.
So that should be the model that we need to look at for universities, so that we fill that gap, but also now allowing and freeing the institutions to focus on their core business.
Okay. And that is
otherwise,
that's very
we will
important.
not be able to provide that demand.
Okay. And that's very important because, I mean, you said for Riara the land might be a challenge, but in institutions which are already in populated areas, even the developers might struggle to find land to develop these facilities. But if you go to public institutions, sometimes land is not really a problem. Absolutely,
yes. So for public universities and other bigger universities, yes, land may not be a problem, but resources are a problem. You may have the land, but you don't have the resources to build. So you still need a partner to be able to provide that. And what I like about some of these purpose-built hostels is that they're built around a community of institutions where it's within walking distance of a campus. So they're not serving just Riara, they're serving Strathmore, Daystar, Management University, others from one facility where students are able to commute. And they provide buses that, shuttle students between the hostel and the campus. So that is where we need to focus our energies as institutions, so that we now put more effort in enhancing the learning experience of the students, while knowing that our students are accommodated in hostels that are overstandard. And I can tell you for sure that there has been discussions within the education sector about creating minimum standards for hostels that can be accredited by institutions and opened up to students. Because right now we don't have, and it's unfortunate where students end up living sometimes.
Okay, and speaking about standards, of course, Brian is still. Brian, sometimes there is that what you look for as a student in a hostel. What is that thing that you look for in a hostel as a student, which sometimes you may not really find?
I think most has been covered by the professor, and I will agree with him in that in today's world, actually, especially in the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, you wouldn't just be looking for a place to sleep. You wouldn't just be looking for a place where you can just come and, stay after classes. As a student, I think what I look for, number one, is a good, secure place. A place where I can feel secure when I come from class. I know that if I leave my things there, they will still stay the same way I left them. And if if I know that if I leave school, if I go there, I'll still be feeling safe, that I can continue learning knowing that nothing will happen. I think another thing that I look for is convenience, yeah? Just like the professor has said, you'll find that some hostels are, located far away from schools, and, just getting to school itself is a huge hassle, yeah? And I think even for quite a number of students who've lost faith in the accommodation, prefer commuting from home, yeah? And you'll find that for some of us, it's a bit of a distance, for you to get to a 7:30 class in the morning, that means sometimes you may have to wake up at 4 in the morning to start preparing so that you can be there on time, yeah?
Okay.
So, that convenience is one of the main things that I look out for. And I think another thing that I look out for is a reliable internet connection, yeah? Because nowadays it's not just about, because nowadays we don't go to class most of the time, but, at least when there's a stable internet connection, I can be able to access my learning material. I can still be able to do my online exams. I can still do my research and all the projects that have been demanded by school comfortably from the, where I stay. So if I go to a hostel and I see that these basic things are not being offered, and I feel that it's going to be inconveniencing for me as a student, I think I won't be comfortable and I will totally dismiss that place, the place to stay. But I think as Kwetu, like where I stay right now, it's, all these are being offered in one package. And especially, I cannot sensitize enough on the hygiene standards on the places to stay, because around, I think in a majority of hostels, the hygiene standards are a bit disappointing. And, you have to share bathrooms, you have to do this and this and this and this, But at least I can say that Kwetu is a breath of fresh air, like where we stay, the hygiene standards are good. The place is clean, the rooms are clean, and you just feel comfortable as a student learning from there.
Okay, and the part of hygiene, I don't really want to comment on it and give my experience. But I remember we'd asked you to be part of this conversation on our question of the day. We asked you, are you a college or university student? What was your worst experience with off-campus accommodation? Some of you have been talking to us. Let's get to see and sample part of that feedback that you'll be sending. Esau Masiba says, I'm a student at Moy University. We call it non-resident. I'm a third year now, but almost every academic year, I buy new household items because of theft. Then during rains, poor roads, unafika class wenzako wanadhani umetoka shambani. Thank you very much, Esau Masibo there, of course. She says, insecurity issues within the off-campus accommodation, theft of household commodities. Thank you. We have some more. Yes. Okoth Jared, theft. My new shoes grew wins with no minute. Thank you, Jared. Of course, we sympathize with you. Jackson Gary says, services such as water and electricity is accessed with difficulty. Some hostels in my school depend on water from wells. This means that without rain, no water. Thank you, Jackson. Jackson, of course, continues, says, some landlords may have some conditions for a resident and student residing in their hostels, which imply that a student should pay the accommodation fee prior or in advance. Thank you, Jackson. Very, very comprehensive feedback. Then we have Francis says, coming late at around 12 a.m. only to find the gate closed, and I had gone to sleep and I had to go to sleep at a friend's house. So hectic. Thank you, Francis. And Uncle says, kuchelewesha rent na usiku mbili, then landlord ananifungia nyumba na anajua vizuri mimi ni comrade, then nikitaka kuhama anakwamilia deposit. Thank you, Uncle. Of course, part of the feedback that you've been sending us. And Raghav, you'll agree with me that a huge part of the feedback actually tends to have an inclination of security.
Yeah, and I mean, totally understandable. Look, when you're in these kind of like ad hoc properties where there's not that professional management, that property management, which is essential, you're going to find instances of theft, poor security issues. For us, I mean, one of the other issues that was mentioned about was electricity and water. We have 24/7 electricity backup, right? So that even like, what we were speaking about earlier, and when you're on online learning mode, if there is power outage for whatever reason, then our generator kicks in, right? We ensure that we provide water as well 24/7. And equally importantly, we have security staff. We have security guards, that are manning the building, but also manning the floors, patrolling the floors, just to ensure that everyone's safe, secure. And I can assure you that no one gets locked out of our gates. If someone does come in at midnight, we'll help you. And don't worry about that. Yeah.
All right. Prof, of course, in your career, I'm sure, even if it's not in the university that you are, I'm sure you've had these cases of, and I've seen this around Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology, around Kenyatta University, cases where students leave school at late into the night, but the places where they pass are dark alleys, no lighting, and there have been cases of theft and even physical assault. So many people have been stabbed. And this gradually actually reflects at the end of the day in how a student performs.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. We find many cases of students being mugged on the way to hostels and things like those. And I go back to the issue of the mental anguish that students go through. In many cases, you find a student now has to leave campus early so that they can be able to get home when it's still daylight. Maybe they had a project they would have loved to complete on campus, because they know once they get to the hostel, there's no internet. They may not find power. So we disrupt the students in a big way by not being able to provide for them that seamless transition from the classroom to the hostel where they're able to live and continue to work on their project. So if we had standards where, like, hostels have reliable electricity, water, internet, and things like those, a student would feel comfortable to walk from campus anytime and then go to the hostel and work until midnight at the comfort of their discussion rooms or their working rooms in the hostels. But in the absence of that, I really pity students, what they have to go through between campus and hostels.
Okay.
So these are important questions we must ask ourselves. What are we doing to facilitate that seamless transition for students?
Prof, allow me to challenge you on this a bit, because definitely there are partners like Akon Holdings and Kwetu and Kejani here. But we see a situation where universities, of course, tend to increase the number of students they enroll every year. Every year, the number keeps going up, even when it's clearly evident that, one, they can't provide accommodation, adequate and quality accommodation to these students which they admit, and they don't have adequate partnerships, of course, to provide quality accommodation for students outside or off campus. Is this a concern to you, Prof?
Absolutely, it is. A long time ago, when some of us went to campus, numbers of students being admitted to the university were tied to the number of beds available in the university. Mm-hmm. But that has since changed when the education sector was liberalized. You had Module 2 and these other channels of accessing education. And so institutions stopped, thinking seriously about how to accommodate and ensure students are accommodated in proper accommodation. For us at RIAR, as I said, our core business is not to develop hostels. So we partnered with a number of hostels, Kwetu being one of them and one of our major partners.
Yeah.
We also have a few others that we have accredited, and we go to them, we supervise, we tell them add this or remove this and do this. Then we avail this to students. Even when they report, they have an array of hostels that they can select from. And I think this is where we need to go as institutions, so that we are not seen to don't care where a student sleeps, provided amekuja class, amefanya exam, na amepita. We don't care. We must care as institutions where our students sleep and how they get there, how they come to campus. Okay. And that's why we appreciate those who are really trying hard to provide even transport. I really enjoyed the Kwetu bus. It even has Wi-Fi inside the bus.
Oh,
so
really?
You continue working as you commute from campus to the hostel.
Okay.
And these are the things that we must provide for our students if we are to be student-centered.
Okay, and definitely, Brian, let me just bring you into the conversation on this, because there are, of course, cases where they are enough. or quality accommodation facilities. But there's also something we don't speak about very often, which is the issue of affordability. Because if I don't have cash, I'll just go to what I can afford. And most likely what I can afford is not quality.
It's true. It's true. If you look around Nairobi, actually, just let's take a look at the metropolitan area.
Yeah.
I think if you come from, if you haven't been staying in Nairobi and you're not used to staying here, you'll find that as a student when you come here, you're trying to look the university, like the university fees may be expensive, and you still have to factor in the transport, you still have to factor in food, you still have to factor in electricity, so many expenses piling up, and then now the rent also comes in. It becomes a bit of a challenge to try and pay all of these together, especially if you're surviving on help or if you're surviving on pocket money from your parents, So you'll find that for some hostels, actually, especially around the area, like I say, like the way Professor has said, some hostels around are really, really expensive. And not even hostels, let's just say the cost of having a house alone in Nairobi is a bit over the roof, You have to pay for rent, you have to pay for deposit, and you still have to furnish the house, or at least even have a bed. You still have to look for food. So it becomes a bit expensive for a student. It becomes a bit inconvenient. So, I mean, it reaches a point where now you're in class and you're starting to ask yourself, hey, now, I'm paying rent for 20,000. Hey, where will I get money for electricity for this? I mean, such factors make it a bit difficult for a student to start, to concentrate in class and understand what they're being told.
Okay.
What they're being told,
All right. Let me bring in Raghav on the point of affordability.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, for us, look, I think what we have to appreciate is that across the market, there's going to be different segments, right? Different products, customer segments who can afford to pay different prices. So for us, I mean, the way we manage that is that we have two different product offerings. One is Kwetu, which is kind of the middle market, rental accommodation, where we've got 5 projects or properties already operational. But then the other one is Kijani, which you also mentioned earlier. Kijani is geared more towards the affordable price segment of it's mass housing, and that's where we also see a significant amount of opportunity. So it's going to be very much about providing very similar facilities to what are being done for Kwetu, but for that affordable, the more, let's say, price-conscious resident.
And that's important because there will be different categories of students, like, let's say myself, you want to pursue your postgraduate studies, but you have a job, you can afford to pay for a good space and you don't want disturbance. But then those are others, of course, who need this more affordable spaces. But how do we do that without compromising on quality? Because clearly, both Prof and Brian have explained how this reflects in a student's, of course, well-being.
No, I mean, that's a fantastic question. I mean, for us, that's part of our day job. That's what we are here for, is to ensure that there is no drop-off in quality, that we understand. I mean, and we've done significant market research, by the way, where we understand what are the amenities that each customer segment is willing to pay for, and what is essential for them to have that environment that is conducive to their living and their education. And that's what we focus on a day-to-day basis. We ensure that the product that we're delivering is fit for purpose, is fit for the requirement that is there. So even though you might go from like a Kwetu to Kijani, we still want to ensure that largely the facilities are the same. There might be some amenities that we don't provide in a Kijani, but that's only because that's based on research, where customers have themselves voiced to us that this is not something we're willing to pay for.
Okay. And Prof, you mentioned earlier that the most sustainable perhaps way to move forward is partnership, so that maybe for institutions that have the land, they can provide the land, and investors like Raghav can bring in the money, and then we develop quality and the issues, of course, of standards. And of course, this is not something new, because in 2018, the Kenyan government tried this. They were trying to raise, I believe, 20 billion shillings to develop, if I'm not wrong, 30,000 bed spaces in public universities that were struggling with, accommodation, shortage of accommodation facilities. But I think 3 years on, we have not had any word. I know you're not the right, perhaps, person to respond to this, but just give us your view with regards to why this didn't take off.
Well, there could be many reasons why this did not take off. I may not be privy to the intricacies of that deal and what could have gone wrong.
Yeah.
But I think it's the right idea. It's the right idea for government to look for private partners who can come on board and help government meet its needs. Because really, government in itself does not have the resources to be able to develop infrastructure, even in the public universities. So partnerships is the way to go for accommodation, even for issues like catering. What are students eating? Where are they? What are they accessing? Even laptops. For example, now as we talk about virtual learning and blended learning, there are many students who are missing out because they don't have devices. Mm-hmm. Some are using smartphones, but they may not be the most ideal. We need laptops. And there are discussions around how do we bring partners on board to avail affordable laptops for students. Even bundles. I know Safaricom and Telcom came in quite handy last year to facilitate that process.
Yeah.
So we require partnerships across many areas so that we ensure our education system is resilient, responsive, and also accessible by all. Otherwise, institutions by themselves cannot be able to do that. It's wishful thinking.
Okay.
To imagine that institutions can do everything by themselves.
All right. And I like that Prof says that this is the way to go. Indeed, we have to deliver quality accommodation facilities to students. But earlier on from your focus, I don't know if you mentioned, but I've seen at least for you and most developers, sometimes the focus has been in Nairobi, but learning is not in Nairobi alone.
But yeah, no, that's a fair question. Yeah. I think, again, it just comes down to kind of the market research that we've done. We find that Nairobi has, significant market. Given the number of learning institutions that are here, it just makes sense for us for now to focus on Nairobi and its metropolitan area. Right now, we don't have plans on branching out to any other location, but I think again that's predicated on some of the research findings that we've come across. Okay,
so 3 or 4 years in this space, especially in the Kenyan market, what is the biggest challenge, of course, with delivering, facilities, especially in this specific asset class?
The challenge is, look, we're still within real estate, right? Ultimately, this is about real estate development, and for us, the challenges that remain are, let's say, on the kind of the development construction side, making sure that we get approvals on time, ensuring that we provide a safe environment during construction. Construction is a very risky activity, and in making sure that we provide kind of a health, and safety protocol to ensure a secure environment during construction activity is very critical, particularly with the investors that we have as well. They put a lot of focus on that, and that's something we feel very strongly about. And then when it comes to operations, it's about just ensuring that you're just maximizing the value that you're offering to your customers. So what is the next step? What is it that you can do to make sure that you're providing them the right environment, the right community
Because we
spirit?
live in the age of the customer, where it is about what the customer wants, really.
And that's all our focus. Our focus is entirely on the customer, and that's why, for us it's very important, because like I said before, it's rental housing. So we're not selling an apartment to Victor and saying, okay, Victor, now look after yourself, right? Victor is staying with us, he's a tenant, so we have to ensure that if Victor has any issues, let's say in his bathroom, his tap is leaking, that we're the ones sorting it out. We're not telling Victor, go get yourself a plumber and sort it out for yourself.
Okay. Yeah. So given this resilience, then can we foresee a situation where, of course, this will become an independent asset class of its own?
Look, globally, PBSA is a very established asset class. It's been there for, I think, almost 20 years. You've got major investors, global investors who have put in a lot of money into student accommodation. And I think that's what points to the kind of the exciting phase that we're in Kenya, that, it's not an established sector. It's very much in its nascency. And it just points to the significant growth potential that is there. When you've got, and maybe Professor can speak to this more than I can, but when you've got, I think it's less than 10% of students enrolled in tertiary education, right? And we want to educate more, right? Because that's how we recognize that that's how we're going to improve everyone's standard of living.
Yeah.
That just points to the fact that there's more students to come in.
Yeah.
To be educated, and therefore much more student accommodation to be provided.
Okay. Prof, you want to respond to that? Because clearly every year, if you look at the figures of the students who graduate, of course, after high school, and those who transition now to institutions of higher learning, there's a small gap, perhaps of 300,000 just disappears in between. But every year this figure goes up and of course, sort of exemplifies the reason for today's conversation.
Yes, indeed. The number has been going up, which is a good thing. And that also now exemplifies the need for adequate student accommodation, because we want students to be able to study wherever they want, wherever they wish. But do they find the right sort of facilities, resources to facilitate them to study there? And I think the bigger question, and this is perhaps to the government, we need to look at the market outside Kenya. You know, Kenya has one of the best education systems around this region. There are huge opportunities for Kenya to invest in the right infrastructure for education to tap into the demographic dividend across Africa. You know, global statistics and projections show that Africa will have majority of the young people in the year 2050 more than any other continent, perhaps Asia a little bit. The population in Africa will grow by more than 99%, while in Europe and North America it will grow by about 2%. So we are able to provide education as a service, education for export, so that we have Africans coming to Kenya to study, but they need to find us ready with the right infrastructure for us to tap into that. And that could earn the country a lot of money if we make the right investments right now. Otherwise, others will run ahead of us, and Kenyan students will be crossing borders to go and study elsewhere.
Okay, and it raises a very valid point that you want to respond briefly just before we close the conversation.
No, I mean, I couldn't agree more with what the professor has to say. I think there's a huge opportunity for Kenya to be a regional hub for education within you know, the continent, given the excellent education institutions that are here. So you know, if we can work together with the government on that, you know, in whatever part we can play as Acorn Holdings, we'd be happy to do so.
Okay, gentlemen, what a wonderful discussion. We have to end it, by the way, and unfortunately we have a few minutes, and I want to get to your closing remarks, and I'll start with you, Brian. From a student's perspective, the universities are listening, Prof is here with us, and of course the developers are listening. What is that ideal, you know, place you would want to stay as a student? In your closing remarks, of course.
I think one of the ideal places would be just a place where I can access learning material very, very easily, in a place that's secure, in a place that's safe, in a place where I don't have to hustle to get to class on time because, you know, a lecturer will start questioning why I'm late and all that. I think accessibility would be a really, really convenient thing for a student to have so that they can be able to learn comfortably. And I think if we have more of student-purposed accommodations coming up, it will be more fun and engaging learning as a student, because if it's a hassle to access academic material, learning is not going to be enjoyable at all, you know. So I think if we can have more of such facilities that are geared towards making learning comfortable and easily accessible, I think we can say that the education sector will improve a lot. And, you know, the experience of being a student is going to be one to look forward to. So if we could have more of such investors coming in to offer such solutions to address these challenges that students are facing, I think we're going to be at a better place to learn as students.
Wonderful. If accommodation is a hassle, learning won't be enjoyable. What a wonderful takeaway from Brian. Prof, your closing remarks on the way forward.
Again, I want to say partnerships is the way to go in this new normal. COVID has taught us important lessons that we must not lose. We must not accept to go back to what we knew as the old normal. And I think we need to also ask ourselves the bigger questions about what is the purpose of education in the digital world? And are we that will be required even 30, 40 years from now? And when we look at that environment, and my challenge to young people out there, please look for an institution that cares about you, that thinks about you, that sees you as an individual human being that has passions and talents that need to be unlocked, and not just a place where you're just seen as just a number coming into class and passing through.
More
so
like
invest in lifelong learning and really look for good institutions that can walk the journey with you.
Wow, another very good takeaway from Prof. Look for good institutions that care about you, not those that view you as a fixture. Raghav, just close the conversation.
Yeah, look, I mean, for us, we're driven by the voice of the customer, and I love what I've heard from Brian and the professor.
Yeah.
You know, our customer is not just the students who live with us, but it's also their parents. It's also, in a way, the education institutions, because we're providing them a service.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're always happy to collaborate and to partner. Like the professor mentioned as well, we're always happy to hear feedback on how we can improve our services to provide that environment that is conducive to student learning.
Okay, what a wonderful discussion. And of course, my director tells me it would be a crime if we left this without getting to hear what some of you have been telling us. Let's get to sample part of that feedback now. Yes, remember we asked you, are you a college or university student? What was your worst experience with off-campus accommodation? Let's get to see some of that feedback now. Yes, Maslin Jepkirui says, paying rent for months and you're not in school due to strikes. Okay, thank you, Maslin. Yes, Anne Wangari says, I did not reside off campus, but hostels were a terrible experience because of bed bugs infestation. I think this extends to what Brian was saying about hygiene. King Jara says, lecturers strike and campus strike that lasts 2 or more months. That simply meant that you have to pay rent. Of course, yes. And Kirui Celestine says, getting to the hostel after evening classes and then you realize food is finished, yet the rent you had paid was inclusive of meals. Kirui Celestine, part of the feedback that of course we were able to sample, of course, from the hundreds that you've sent us. We have thoroughly enjoyed the last 1 hour of this conversation about the future of education, especially with regards to student accommodation. Many thanks to Raghav Gandhi, the Chief Investment Officer at Hecon Holdings, joining me in studio. And joining us virtually this morning, Professor Robert Gateru is a Vice Chancellor at Riara University, and also Brian Kasiu is a Strathmore University student and also a resident at Kwetu Hostels. Right, that is the end of it. We have to go for a quick break, but when we come back, we talk about the future of something else, not just education, but also work. You don't want to miss this.